Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. And now, on with the podcast.
Of evil, waged war on humanity for 6 years, and then in his bunker wed Ava Braun, and the next morning blew his brains out. Marriage is hard. What did she say?
You call this a bunker?
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Science Wednesday, June the 10th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and Professor Feynman. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you, Varney and Company.
For being here this morning, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria. Morning, everyone. There are two factors affecting the markets this morning: war news and inflation. So let's start with the Consumer Price Index. In May, it went up 0.5%. In the last 12 months, it is up 4.2%. That means consumer inflation has moved to the highest level, up to the highest level since April of 2023. Stocks down across the board. The Fed won't lower interest rates with inflation above 4%. The Dow off about 200, Nasdaq's down 277. Bitcoin, well, that's down. It's threatening to fall below 60,000. 61.5 is your current quote. All right, war news. President Trump called our own Trey Yingst and told him details of the downing of that Apache helicopter. A drone hit it, lodged between the pilots, but did not explode. The pilots were rescued by an unmanned sea drone. That incident convinced the president that Iran was playing for time, taking too long to negotiate. So there were new strikes on Iran overnight. And the president told Trey Yingst that he is now considering further strikes on Iranian power plants and bridges. Before this news broke, the price of oil had been down to $87 a barrel. Now it's back up, closing in on $89, $90 a barrel. Politics, Graham Plattner won the Senate primary in Maine, but he only received about 70% of the vote. Janet Mills, who had withdrawn from the race but whose name was still on the ballot, she received about 20%. That means less than wholehearted support for Plattner. In California, Steve Hilton secured his place on the November ballot. He's a Republican and will face Democrat Javier Becerra in November. That will give Californians a real choice after a decade of one-party rule. It is possible that a Republican could win a statewide election in California. Wednesday, June 10th, 2026.
And that was Stuart Varney. Nonprofit News Now. Thank you. Here's the truth. Liberals are not afraid of confrontation. They thrive in it. They manipulate with charm, with rage, with guilt. Boundaries remove the bait. Strip away the theatrics and leave only facts, and liberals are powerless. When conservatives say no without trembling, walk away without flinching, refuse to respond to provocation, that's when liberals feel the shift. Conservatives are no longer an actor in the liberals' stage play. They're the director of their own lives, and that's unbearable to liberals. The moment conservatives stop over-explaining is the moment they start winning. Liberals are masters at making conservatives doubt their decisions. They question motives, tone, timing, anything to chip away at the conservatives' confidence. But boundaries don't require explanation, they require consistency. Conservatives don't need to justify their choices to people who refuse to respect them. They don't need to argue values with someone who profits off their insecurity. The boundary is the explanation. That is intolerable. Full stop. That is power. That is clarity. Clarity terrifies those who depend on confusion to keep control. Clarity terrifies those who depend on confusion to keep control. They will call conservatives cold, selfish, unreasonable. Let them. That's not truth. It's noise. The louder they scream, the more it reveals how much they depend on conservative compliance, because for a liberal, conservative compliance was a drug. Endless tolerance was their playground. But when conservatives sober up and start making decisions from a place of worth instead of fear, liberals lose access. Nothing frustrates a liberal more than losing control over someone they thought they had locked in. But let's be honest. Boundaries won't feel comfortable at first. They will feel heavy. Conservatives will second-guess themselves. They'll wonder if they're being too much, but they're not. They're being free. They're being whole. They're choosing peace over approval. That's not selfish. It's sacred. The more conservatives practice it, the stronger they get, because boundaries are not meant to push people away. Boundaries are meant to protect the right people and remove the wrong ones. They are an invitation to mutual respect, and anyone who cannot honor that invitation has no business in the conservatives' inner circle. So, hold the line without apology, without fear. Conservatives owe no one unlimited access to their life. Boundaries are not about rejection, they're about direction, and the moment that conservatives understand that is the moment they stop being a target. They start becoming a force. Liberals hate that. That's not your problem anymore. If you need their approval, they win. That's the game. That's the hook. Liberals are masters at keeping conservatives hungry for praise, desperate for recognition, constantly second-guessing their own value until they forget who they are. Liberals will dangle compliments like a carrot, only to yank it back the moment conservatives get close because they want validation to come through them. That's how liberals maintain control. They want conservatives to become addicted to their opinion of them. But the moment conservatives stop playing that game, the moment they realize that value does not require external confirmation, conservatives take their power back. Tough direction is not arrogance, it's clarity. It's conservatives looking in the mirror and saying, we're enough. Not perfect, but whole. Liberals can't stand that because it means their opinion becomes irrelevant. Conservatives are not swayed by liberal disapproval. They're not controlled by liberal praise. Conservatives are free, and freedom to a liberal is unbearable because they can't manipulate people who don't need what they're offering. When conservatives validate themselves, conservatives stop auditioning for a role in the liberals' drama. They stop explaining their worth. They stop negotiating their identity. They simply are, and that kind of certainty radiates. It repels manipulation. Liberals will test it, of course. They'll throw their usual tricks at conservatives: gaslighting, guilt, fake apology, sudden praise, to see if conservatives will bite. But when conservatives have done the work, when their esteem is no longer for sale, the liberals' bait falls flat. It doesn't move anyone, and that frustrates them deeply. Understand this: liberals survive on supply. That supply is conservative attention, conservative reactions, conservative emotional energy. When conservatives validate themselves, the supply dries up. Back in a minute. Thank you. So this is Maria Bartiromo interviewing Senator John Thune.
Let me end on the midterm elections, ask you how you're feeling, because the other day I saw what Chuck Schumer was saying over and over again: we're going to take down Susan Collins and we will take back the Senate.
Well, I mean, I think that, any election starts with quality candidates. And I think in all the competitive races around the country, we've got really high quality candidates. And then you've got to have a record of accomplishment to run on. You've got to have resources to get that message, that story out to the American people in their states. And our job is to ensure that we've got those resources. Now, this is a tough political environment. It's a midterm election. President's not on the ballot, which means turnout's going to be an issue. And we've got to really be working the ground game. But I think we've got strong candidates in the right places. The Dems they're giddy and bullish and all that, mainly because they think that there's going to be so much intensity on the Democrat side.
Okay, so anyways, he blathers on, and this is all wrong. Wrong. It's really simple. What Schumer is doing is bluffing. And this is what the Democrats do all day, every day. They bluff. You call their bluff, they bluff some more. And so that's what he needs to do, is call them out and say that these people are bluffing. They know they're going to lose the midterms. They know there's no possible way they can win. They know that every right-thinking voter in the United States of America hates their guts. That kind of thing. Okay, that is going to be more motivating to your base and demoralizing to the Democrats than to do this. I don't know what the hell he's doing. Is this an explanation? Is it some kind of an exposition, a civics lesson? What? Who knows? But he's wrong. Keep it simple. And remember, the Democrats are always bluffing. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, motivation.
We all get knocked down in every aspect of life.
You're going to fall flat on your face. You're going to be criticized when you come out into the arena called life. You're going to feel awkward and stupid and dumb sometimes, but it's okay. It goes with the territory.
When the defining moment comes, either you define the moment or the moment defines you. Either you define the moment, you decided that you're going to not concern yourself with the naysayers, that you're not going to concern yourself with what has happened or what hasn't happened, but you're going to make the commitment to do what you've got to do so that you can have a lifestyle that you've never experienced before. Or the moment defines you, and you decide to play it safe. And 20 years from now, you say to yourself, what if I would have taken a chance on myself? What if I would have stayed in the game? What if I would have kept making the phone calls? What if, and what if? But let me tell you something. Something amazing begins to happen when you make the decision to move forward on your goals and your dreams.
And maybe you've been knocked down in your life and it seems like, hey, the fight is over. It is not over unless you quit. You have to learn to turn some dog in you.
Life is going to throw some serious blows, some body blows, and they're going to hurt. But I want you to feel that pain going through your body. And as pain leaves your body, guess what's going to take its place? Success. No pain, no gain.
Pain has a purpose. Don't go through it, grow through it.
Stop running from your pain and embrace your pain. Your pain is going to be a part of your prize. I challenge you to push yourself.
When you get knocked down, and you're going to get knocked down, when you run into some roadblocks, and you're going to run into them, when you have some setbacks, you can always be able to bring yourself back in, knowing if someone has done it, it's possible that I can do it. You've got to be willing to face rejection and know again and again and again, defeat again and again and again, and every time life knocks you down, you trip up and say, it's not over until I win.
Fight your way through this battle. You have what it takes. Your greatness comes from within. And once you realize that, nothing will stop you. Nothing will keep you from being great. It's already there. You just have to feel it and know that you were placed here for a reason. I want what all other men want. But when the opposition hits, when the challenge hits, when the pain creeps in, when the uncertainty creeps in, when the cuts, when the scars, when the bruises come, I just want it a little bit more than they wanted. If you dare to be great, if you dare to do something that you've never done before, if you dare to go to limits that you've never went to before, they will remember your legacy forever.
What you become in the process is more important than the dream. The kind of person you become, the character that you build, the courage that you develop, the faith that you're manifesting. Oh, it's something that you get up in the morning, you look yourself in the mirror, you're a different kind of person. You walk with a different kind of spirit. You know it was hard, but you did it hard.
And so here's what I say to you. There are going to be times that you're going to be wondering, why should I keep showing up and working my business? Why should I keep at it? Why should I keep showing up to the conventions? Why should I keep picking up the phones and making the phone calls? Why should I keep fighting for my goals and fighting for my dreams? And what I want to remind you is that you got to show up for your life regardless of the circumstances. You got to show up in spite of the naysayers. You got to show up in spite of the conversation going on in your mind. You got to show up for your life, because if you don't, nobody else will.
And that was motivating. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now some meditation. And that was a little meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Professor Feynman.
Try to predict your next thought before it happens, right now. What will you think next? You can't. And that should bother you a lot more than it does. Thoughts don't feel generated. They feel received. They arrive already formed, already in words, already pointed in a direction. And you experience them as if you wrote them, but you didn't write them. You were just the first one to read them. The neuroscience here is uncomfortable, and most people never look at it directly because the alternative, that you are the author of your own mind, is so convincing, so total, so woven into every experience you've ever had, that questioning it feels absurd. But let's look at it anyway. In 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet ran an experiment that has never stopped being controversial. He hooked people up to EEG machines, measuring electrical activity in the brain, and asked them to make a simple voluntary movement. Flex a wrist whenever they felt like it. No schedule, no prompt, pure, spontaneous choice. He also had them watch a fast-moving clock and note the exact position of the hand at the moment they first felt the urge to move, the moment they became aware of intending to move. What he found, brain activity associated with the upcoming movement, a signal called the readiness potential, began about 550 milliseconds before the movement. That's expected. Brains take time to prepare actions. What was not expected, conscious awareness of the intention to move, came about 350 to 400 milliseconds after the brain activity began. The neural decision, as a measurable physical event in the brain, preceded conscious awareness of deciding by more than a third of a second. The brain started preparing the action before the person knew they were going to act. This has been replicated, extended, made more precise with fMRI technology that can measure activity in specific brain regions. In some studies, researchers watching brain scans can predict which of two buttons a person will press up to 10 seconds before the person reports deciding. 10 seconds of neural buildup to what feels, from the inside, like a spontaneous choice made in the moment. The uncomfortable interpretation, not the only interpretation, but the one that keeps coming back, is that the conscious experience of deciding is the brain noticing a decision that was already made, not making it, noticing it. You're downstream of your own choices, and it gets deeper than that. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 95 and 99% of brain processing is unconscious, not repressed in the Freudian sense, just below the threshold of awareness. Language comprehension happens unconsciously. By the time you hear a sentence and understand it, the processing is done, and you only get the result. Object recognition is unconscious. You see a chair, not a collection of edges and surfaces that your visual cortex assembled. Emotional responses are unconscious. You feel something before you know why. Social judgments happen unconsciously. You form impressions of people in milliseconds, long before any deliberate evaluation. What reaches consciousness is not the processing, it's the output, a finished product delivered to you without any receipt showing how it was made. You experience the conclusion, not the argument that produced it. You experience the judgment, not the evidence that weighed it. And then, here's the part that should really land. You construct a story about how you reached that conclusion, and you experience that story as a memory of thinking. The sense that you consciously worked through something, that you thought it over carefully, that you arrived at a conclusion through deliberate reasoning, that feeling is frequently constructed after the fact, not always, but more often than feels comfortable. This isn't speculation. There's a specific experiment that makes it concrete. Patients who have had the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of fibers connecting the two brain hemispheres, severed for medical reasons, are called split brain patients. Their two hemispheres can't communicate. Researchers can exploit this by presenting information exclusively to one hemisphere, say flashing an image only in the left visual field, which goes to the right hemisphere, and then asking the patient to respond with the left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere. Here's the classic version. The right hemisphere sees the word walk, and the patient gets up and starts walking. The left hemisphere, the one that controls speech, didn't see the instruction. When researchers ask, "Why did you stand up?" the left hemisphere needs to answer. It didn't see any instruction. It has no idea why the body just stood up. It doesn't say, "I don't know." It never says that. It produces an answer immediately and confidently. "I wanted to stretch my legs. I felt like getting some water." Something plausible, something that fits, invented on the spot, experienced as memory. Neuroscientists Michael Gazzaniga and Joseph Ledoux called this the interpreter, a system in the left hemisphere that generates explanations for behavior and experience, regardless of whether it actually has access to the real cause. The interpreter doesn't wait for accurate information. It fills in the gap with whatever narrative fits, and that narrative feels like recollection. The split brain research reveals it cleanly because the two hemispheres are isolated. But the interpreter operates in all of us, all the time. We just can't isolate it from the outside. When you feel certain you know why you did something, there's a real possibility you're experiencing the interpreter's output, a plausible story constructed after the behavior, not a genuine memory of conscious motivation. Now the inputs, because even setting aside whether thoughts are consciously generated, where does the raw material come from? Every thought you have is built from language, concepts, framings, metaphors, and categories that you didn't invent. You absorbed them from the culture you were born into, the family you grew up in, the language you learned to speak, the books you read, the conversations you had, the media you consumed, the words you think in. You didn't make those up. The categories you used to divide the world, you inherited them. The things you take as obvious, you were taught them so early and so consistently that they stopped feeling taught. The language you think in doesn't just transmit thought. It shapes what thoughts are possible. There's a concept in Japanese, amai, that describes a kind of comfortable presumed dependence on another person's benevolence. There's no precise English equivalent. English speakers can understand the concept when it's explained. English speakers can understand the concept when it's explained. But it doesn't arise naturally, spontaneously, as a thought, because there's no word waiting to trigger it. The concept exists in the space between words, and it's harder to think because of that. Benjamin Lee Horf's strong version of this, that language determines thought entirely, is probably too strong. But the weak version, that language shapes thought, makes some things easier to think and some things harder, has a lot going for it. And your emotional state right now is shaping which associations fire. The same question, asked when you're anxious versus when you're calm, produces different answers. Not because the facts changed, because which neural pathways activate depends on your current state. And different pathways lead to different associations, and different associations lead to different conclusions. You think you're evaluating the question. You're partly evaluating the question and partly revealing the current configuration of your nervous system. Then there's priming, which is where this gets really unsettling. Priming is when exposure to a word, image, or concept makes related concepts more accessible, without any awareness that this happened. The most famous example: researchers had participants unscramble sentences containing words related to elderly people, words like Florida, gray, wrinkle, bingo. After the task, they were let go. Researchers covertly timed how long it took them to walk to the elevator. They walked more slowly, measurably, significantly more slowly, without knowing they were doing it, without intending it, without any conscious awareness that the words had affected them at all. The thought, or in this case, the behavior, felt spontaneous. It was installed. Advertising operates entirely on this principle. You see a car ad with beautiful landscapes and freedom and adventure. You don't consciously think, I associate this car with freedom. But later, when you're considering cars, that association is more accessible. It fires more easily. It feels like your own intuition. Political framing operates this way. Whether an issue is described as illegal immigration or undocumented workers doesn't just describe the same thing differently. It primes different networks of associations before any evaluation begins. The thought that arrives after the framing feels like an independent judgment. It was partly shaped by the framing. Social media feeds are priming machines running continuously. What you're repeatedly exposed to becomes what's accessible. What's accessible shapes what arrives. The thought feels like yours because you don't remember what installed it, and the installation process was invisible. The voice in your head, the inner monologue that feels most intimately, undeniably you. That voice has a history that predates you. Lev Vygotsky, a Soviet psychologist who did most of his work in the 1920s and 30s, observed something important about how children develop thinking. Young children think out loud. They narrate what they're doing. They argue with themselves verbally. They talk through problems externally with other people before they can do it internally. His insight, inner speech, the internal monologue, develops as an internalization of external speech. Children begin by talking to others. They gradually bring that process inside. Thinking in language is, in its developmental origin, a social act that was moved indoors, which means the voice in your head has the cadence, vocabulary, judgment patterns, and emotional tone of specific people you encountered early in life. Parents, teachers, older siblings, early caregivers. The way they talked to you became the way you talked to yourself. The criticisms they voiced became the criticisms you direct inward. The frameworks they used to make sense of the world became the frameworks you use. The most private thing about you, the internal voice that feels like the core of your consciousness, is built from other people, not metaphorically, developmentally, structurally. And the cultural layer goes even deeper than the personal one. What counts as obvious, what requires an explanation, what's not even considered a question, all of that varies enormously across cultures and historical periods. People in medieval Europe didn't think, I have religious beliefs. They thought about reality. The framework was so total, it was invisible. We're inside frameworks right now that future people will see clearly, and we can't see it all. The thoughts that feel most obvious, the ones that barely feel like thoughts, the ones that are just the way things are, those are the most thoroughly installed. All of this leads to the free will question, and I want to be precise here, because it's easy to slide into a version of this that's more dramatic than what the evidence actually says. Every thought is caused by prior brain states. Those brain states were caused by prior experience, genetics, and environment. That chain of causation goes back before you were born. In that sense, in the mechanistic physical sense, your thoughts are determined by things that were in place before you had any say. You feel like you're choosing. That feeling is real. It's a genuine experience, a genuine feature of what it's like to be you. But the experience isn't evidence for the mechanism. The experience of choosing is itself a product of the same brain that's producing everything else. A thermostat responds to temperature and changes state. It doesn't feel like it's choosing. You respond to inputs, sensory information, memory, emotional state, priming, language, and change state, and you feel like you're choosing. The difference might be the feeling of choice, not the presence of choice in any mechanistic sense. This is not nihilism. Knowing the mechanism doesn't change the experience. It doesn't make decisions irrelevant or choices meaningless. It doesn't make decisions irrelevant or choices meaningless. What you expose yourself to changes the inputs. What you practice changes the brain states. What you attend to changes what fires. Within the determined system, there's enormous variation in what gets determined. And that variation is what we ordinarily call agency. But it does mean that I thought of this myself as a much more complicated claim than it feels like. Feynman, and this is where the title comes from, had a specific obsession that I think is the most useful frame for all of this. He was constantly distinguishing between knowing the name of something and knowing something. He'd use the example of a bird. His father taught him that a certain bird was called a brown-throated thrush, and in other languages had other names. And knowing all those names tells you nothing about the bird, its behavior, its biology, how it relates to other birds. The name is not the thing. Most of what we call our own thoughts are names. They're labels, inherited framings, second-hand conclusions absorbed from the culture and mistaken for original thinking. That's just how people are. You have to be realistic. That's not how the world works. These aren't thoughts. They're installed conclusions wearing the clothes of thoughts. Genuinely original thinking is rare precisely because it requires noticing that a category you were given is wrong, or that a question nobody is asking is the important one, or that an assumption everyone makes is false. And you can't do that from inside the assumption. You have to get outside it somehow. The scientists who changed everything, Copernicus, Darwin, Einstein, Bohr, weren't necessarily smarter than their contemporaries. They were willing to notice that a framework everyone was using was producing the wrong answers, and to take that seriously rather than explaining it away. That requires something most education actively discourages, questioning whether the category itself is right, not just whether you've applied it correctly. Questioning whether a thought is yours isn't philosophical navel-gazing. It's not paralysis. It's the entry point to actually thinking, as opposed to performing the motions of thinking while executing pre-installed conclusions. So what can you actually do with all of this? You can't stop thoughts from arriving pre-formed. That's not a realistic goal, and pursuing it will make you miserable. The unconscious will keep processing. The interpreter will keep narrating. Thoughts will keep arriving as outputs, not drafts. But there is a gap between the thought arriving and you endorsing it, acting on it, treating it as your position. That gap is small, easy to miss, but it's real, and you can learn to notice it. You can ask, when a thought arrives, especially a confident, obvious feeling one, where did this come from? What does it take for granted? What would have to be false for this thought to be wrong? Whose voice does this sound like? Is this a conclusion I've actually examined, or is it a name I learned and have been carrying ever since? You can change the inputs deliberately. What you read, who you talk to, what problems you sit with over time, what you force yourself to argue against, all of that changes what the unconscious processes, which changes what arrives. You can't control the outputs directly, but you can influence the inputs, and the inputs shape the outputs. You can hold your most obvious beliefs with slightly more suspicion than your uncertain ones. The uncertain ones you know to question. The obvious ones feel like they don't need questioning, which is exactly why they need it most. The goal isn't to have thoughts with no origin. Everything has an origin. The goal is to be a more conscious participant in which origins you expose yourself to, and to catch the gap between a thought arriving and a thought being yours. Because there's a version of you that just processes inputs and generates outputs and calls the whole thing thinking. And there's a version of you that does that, because that's unavoidable, but also occasionally steps back, looks at the output before endorsing it, and asks, is this actually true, or does it just feel true because I've never examined it? That second version is rarer. It's harder. It's what Feynman was pointing at when he distinguished knowing from knowing the name. The thought you just had probably wasn't yours in any deep sense. But what you do with that thought right now, in the gap between receiving it and acting on it, that might be the closest thing to you there is.
And that was Professor Feynman. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.